Those who grew up before the 2000s, in what ways did the world feel doomed back then? I remember a lot more talk about saving the rainforests. Early 90s. In the 90s it was the AIDS crisis, crack epidemic, and rising gang violence. Though compared to looming nuclear holocaust of the 80s and earlier, it was quite pleasant. Destruction of the rainforest. In the early 70s, in the US, we were conditioned to believe it all could end at any minute if either of us pushed the button. This lasted until the wall fell. Really. But telling a kindergartner to hide under the desk in case a hydrogen bomb was dropped kinda put some fear in ya. Waiting for the Russians to launch a nuclear bomb consumed most of the 70s and 80s. Then 9/11 happened in 2001 and a lot of things changed. I remember that hole in the ozone layer was supposed to fry us. I also remembering hearing we were all gonna have to wear hazmat suits by the time I was an adult, because of acid rain and such. A nuclear holocaust. It felt potentially doomed, but not doomed. The Cold War made the possibility of nuclear war a concern, but it didn't feel like it was destined to happen. Y2K. It was the end of the world. I remember in the mid-90s a large number of Bosnian refugees moved into the city I was living in, and entered my school, and I became friends with many of them. Spent time in their homes and heard their stories about the war that had displaced them, and that really affected my view of the world. It made the possibility of war feel so real. And I was already a super poor kid in an abusive and unstable household. That was my first experience of a sense of global doom. Then Y2K was a huge scare. All the computers wouldn't be able to function once the new century began and the dates rolled forward. Everything will screech to a halt and no one will be able to access vital services. Then absolutely nothing happened and the world went on like normal and we got amazing music videos. Like Waiting for Tonight by Jennifer Lopez, and my teenage self was so enthralled. 80s was nuclear war fear, 90s was Y2K. Now it's the fact the patients are running the asylum. Up until 9/11. I felt as though the late 90s early 2000s were quite optimistic. 80s had the AIDS epidemic, which was messed up. Early 90s I remember crack being a big issue. For me growing up in the 90s, the world seemed full of hope and promise. Yeah, so much for that. From 890-2001 there wasn't much doom like today. I do remember people dying in heat waves a hell of a lot more though. I thought the Balkan conflict would escalate into WW3. Cold War was a thing in the 80s still. So nuclear war was always close. Lots of movies then about the nuclear disaster or mistake, winking face for the other part, everything honky-dory. Winking face. I wouldn't say the world felt doomed, but we worried that nuclear accidents might doom parts of it. I lived not that far from 3 Mile Island when it had its big malfunction, and I kept looking in that direction, half expecting to see a huge radioactive fireball that would kill us all. This was in 1979. Lots of ways. Nuclear war. Every single year was supposed to be the end of the world, according to Nostradamus and Mayans. Y2K was gonna be another end of the world. Cults kept killing themselves over it being end of days. There were tons of national news kidnappings and serial killers. Basically there's always been some fear pushed by media of some form. AIDS. Hole in the ozone layer. Global thermonuclear war. Nuclear holocaust, acid rain, pollution. AIDS epidemic.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.